But it turned out that Dad had given all the ground he intended to, and the girls found Mother a weak reed on which to lean. "Neither my sisters nor I have ever used face powder," Mother told Anne and Ernestine when they asked her to intervene in their behalf. "Frankly, girls, I consider it non-essential." "Don't tell me you'd rather see a nose full of freckles." "At least that looks natural. And when it comes to the matter of high heels, I don't see how your father can be expected to travel around the world talking about eliminating fatigue, while you girls are fatiguing yourself with high heel shoes." Dad kept a sharp lookout for surreptitious painting, and was especially suspicious whenever one of the girls looked particularly pretty. "What's gotten into you tonight?" he'd ask, sniffing the air for traces of powder or perfume. Ernestine, after playing outside most of the afternoon, came to supper one evening with flushed cheeks. "Come over here, young lady," Dad yelled. "I warned you about painting. Let me take a look at you. I declare you girls pay no more attention to me than if I were a cigar store Indian. A man's got to wear grease in his hair and gray flannel trousers to get any attention in this house nowadays." "I haven't got on makeup, Daddy." "You haven't, eh? Don't think you can fool me. And don't think I'm fooling you. And don't think I'm fooling you when I tell you you've just about painted your way into that convent." "The one with the 12-foot wall or the one with the 10-foot wall?" Ern asked. "Don't be impudent." He pulled out a handkerchief and held a corner of it out to Ern. "Spit on that." He took the wet part of the handkerchief, rubbed her cheeks, and examined it. "Well, Ernestine," he said after a minute, "I see that it isn't rouge, and I apologize. But it might have been, and I won't have it. Do you hear?" Dad prided himself on being able to smell perfume as soon as he walked into a room, and on being able to pick the offender out of a crowd. "Ernestine, are you the one we have to thank for that smell?" he asked. "Good Lord, it smells like a French garbage can." "What smell, Daddy?" "By jingo, don't tell me you're indulging in perfume now." "Why not, Daddy? Perfume isn't painting or makeup, and it smells so good." "Why not? Because it stinks up good fresh air, that's why not. Now go up and wash that stuff off before I come up and wash it off for you. Don't you know what men think when they smell perfume on a woman?" "All I know is what one man thinks," Ernestine complained, "and he thinks I should wash it off." "Thinks nothing," said Dad. "He knows, and he's telling you. Now get moving." Clothes remained a subject of considerable friction, but the matter that threatened to affect Dad's stability was jazz. Radios were innocuous, being still in the cat whisker and headphone stage, and featured such stimulating programs as the Arlington time signals. But 5- and 6-piece dance bands were turning out huge piles of graphophone records, and we tried to buy them all. We already had an ample supply of graphophones, because of the ones Dad had acquired for the language records. And we still weren't allowed to neglect our language lessons. But once we had played the required quota of French, German, and Italian records, we switched to Stumbling, Limehouse Blues, Last Night on the Back Porch, Charlie My Boy, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, and You've Got to See Mama Every Night or You Can't See Mama at All. Not only did we listen to them, we sang with them, imitated them, and rolled back the rugs and danced to them. Dad didn't particularly object to jazz music. He thought some of it was downright catchy, but he felt that we devoted far too much time to it, that the words were something more than suggestive, and that the kind of dancing that went with it might lead to serious consequences. As he walked from room to room in the house, jazz assailed him from phonograph after phonograph, and he sometimes threw up his hands in disgust. "Da, da, dee, da, da, da," he bellowed sarcastically. "If you spent half as much time improving your minds as you do memorizing those stupid songs, you could recite the Quran forwards and backwards. Wind up the frictrola and let's have some more jazz. Da, da, dee, da, da, da. Let's have that record about I love my sweetie 100 times a night." "You made that song up," we told him. "That's not a record, Daddy." "Maybe it's not a record," he said, "but take it from me, it's well above average. Da, da, dee, da, da, da." When Anne came home from school one afternoon and announced that she had been invited to her first dance, she seemed so happy that both Dad and Mother were happy for her. "I told you that if I started to dress like the other girls, everything would be all right and that I would be popular with the boys," Anne crowed. Joe Scales has asked me to go with him to the prom next Friday night. That's lovely, dear, Mother said. That's just fine, Dad smiled. Is he a nice boy? Nice? Gee, I'll say. He's a cheerleader and he has a car. Two mighty fine recommendations, Dad said. If only he had a raccoon coat, I suppose he'd be listed in the yearbook as the one most likely to succeed. The sarcasm was lost on Anne. He's going to get his raccoon coat next year when he goes to Yale, she hastened to assure Dad. His father promised it to him if he passes his work. That takes a load off my mind, said Dad. It used to be that a father promised his son a gold watch if he didn't smoke until he was 21. Now the kids get a raccoon coat as a matter of routine if they manage to stumble through high school. He shook his head and sighed. Honestly, I don't know what the world's coming to, he said. I really don't. Friday night, you say? He pulled a notebook out of his pocket and consulted it. It's all right. I can make it. You can make what? Anne asked him suspiciously. I can make the dance, said Dad. You didn't think for a minute I was going to let you go out by yourself at night with that cheerleader, did you? Oh, Daddy, Anne moaned. You wouldn't spoil everything by doing something like that, would you? What's he going to think of me? He'll think you're a sensible, well-brought-up child with sensible parents, Mother put in. I'm sure that if I called up his mother right now, she'd be glad to hear that your father was going along as a chaperone. Don't you trust your own flesh and blood? Of course we trust you, Dad said. I know you're being brought up right. I trust all my daughters. It's that cheerleader I don't trust. Now, you might as well make up your mind to it. Either I go or you don't. Do you think it would help if I called up his mother and explained the situation to her? Mother asked. Anne had become philosophic about breaking Dad down a little at a time, and she had suspected all along that there was going to be a third person on her first date. No thanks, Mother, she said. I'd better announce the news myself in my own way. I'll guess I'll have to tell him about some people still being in the dark concerning the expression that two's company and three's a crowd. I don't know what he's going to say, though. He'll probably be tickled to death to have someone along to pay for the sodas, Dad told her. Shall I tell him we'll go in his car or ours? Anne asked. His car? I haven't seen it, but I can imagine it. No doors, no fenders, no top, and a lot of writing about in case of fire, throw this in. I wouldn't be seen dead in it, even if the dance was a masquerade and I was going as a cheerleader. No, sir, we'll go in foolish carriage. Sometimes, Anne said slowly, it's hard to be the oldest. When I think of Ernestine, Martha, Lillian, Jane, they won't have to go through any of this. I wonder if they'll just take things for granted, or whether they'll appreciate what I've suffered for them. On the night of Anne's first date, we stationed ourselves at strategic windows so we could watch Joe Scales arrive. It wasn't every day that a cheerleader came to call. As Dad had predicted, Anne's friend drove up to the house in an ancient Model T with writing on it. We could hear the car several blocks before it actually hove into sight, because it was equipped with an exhaust whistle that was allowed to function as a matter of routine. When the car proceeded at a moderate speed, which was hardly ever, the whistle sounded no worse than a hellish roar. But when young Mr. Scales stepped on the gas, the roar became high-pitched, deafening, and insane. As the Model T bumped down Eagle Rock Way, heads popped out of the windows of neighboring houses, dogs raced into the woods with their tails between their legs, and babies started to scream. The exhaust whistle, coupled with the natural engine noises, precluded the necessity of Mr. Scales giving any further notice about the car's arrival at its destination. But the etiquette of the day was rigid, and he followed it to the letter. First, he turned off the engine, which automatically and mercifully silenced the whistle. Then, while lounging in the driver's seat, he tooted and retooted the horn until Anne finally came to the front door. Come on in, Joe, Anne called. Okay, baby, is your pop ready? Dad was peeking at the arrival from behind a curtain in his office. If he pops me, I'll pop him, Dad whispered to Mother. My God, Lily, I mean Great Caesar's ghost. Come here and look at him. It's Joe College in the flesh. And he just about comes up to Anne's shoulder. Anne Chic was wearing a black and orange striped blazer, gray Oxford bags, a bow tie on an elastic band, and a brown triangular pork pie hat pinched into a bowsprit at the front. You and I are going to the dance, Joe shouted to Anne, and so's your old man, get it? So's your old man. Of course she gets it, wise guy, Dad grumbled for Mother's benefit. What do you think she is, a moron? And let me hear you refer to me tonight as the old man, and you'll get it too, I promise you. Hush, Mother warned him, coming over to peek out the curtain. He'll hear you. Actually, he's kind of cute, in a sort of vest pocket way. Cute, said Dad. He looks like what might happen if a pygmy married a barber pole. And look at that car. What's that written on the side? Jump in, sardine. Here's your tin. Well, don't worry about the car, Mother told him. You'll be riding in yours, not that contraption. Thank the Lord for small favors. You stall him and Anne off until I can get the side curtains put up. I'm not going to drive through town with that blazer showing. Someone might think he was one of our kids. Dad disappeared in the direction of the barn, and Mother went into the living room to meet the caller. As she entered, Joe was demonstrating to Frank and Bill how the bow tie worked. It's a William Tell tie, he said, holding the bow away from his neck and allowing it to pop back into position. You pull the bow, and it hits the apple. Both Frank and Bill were impressed. You're the first cheerleader we ever saw up close, Frank said. Gee. Joe was sitting down when he was introduced to Mother. Remembering his manners, he tipped his hat, unveiling for just a moment a patent leather hairdo, parted in the middle. Will you lead some cheers for us? Bill begged. We know them all. Anne and Ernestine taught them to us. Joe leaped to his feet. Sure thing, he said. He cupped his hands over his mouth and shouted in an adolescent baritone that cracked and made Mother shudder. Let's have a hoo-rah-ray and a tiger for Montclair High. A hoo-rah-ray and a tiger. I want to hear you holler now. Ready? He turned sideways to us, dropped on one knee, and made his fists go in a circle, like a squirrel on a treadmill. Hoo! He screamed at the top of his voice. Rah! Ray! It was at this point that Dad entered the room. He stood viewing the proceedings with disgust, lips pursed and hands on hips. At the end of the cheer, he sidled over toward Mother. The car won't start, he whispered, and I can't say that I blame it. What shall I do? You could go in his car. With that insane calliope and those signs, Dad hissed. Do I look like a sardine looking for a tin to leap into? Not exactly, Mother conceded. Why don't you call a cab then? Look at him, Dad whispered. He doesn't come up to her shoulder. You wouldn't dare get funny with her. She'd knock him cold. Dad walked over to where Joe and Anne were sitting. I hope you youngsters won't mind, he said, but I won't be able to go to the dance with you. No, we don't mind at all, Daddy, said Anne. Do we, Joe? A hoo-rah-ray and a tiger for me, is that it? Dad asked. Joe made no attempt to hide his elation. That's it, he said. Come on, baby, let's shake that thing. We're running late. Now I want you to be home at midnight, Dad said to Anne. I'm going to be right here waiting for you, and if you're not here by 1 minute after midnight, I'm coming looking for you. Do you understand? All right, Daddy, Anne grinned. Good old foolish carriage saved the day, didn't it? That, said Dad, and the way certain other matters, he looked pointedly down at Scales, shaped up. Come on, Cinderella, said Scales, before the good fairy turns things into field mice and pumpkins. He and Anne departed, and he didn't forget to tip his hat. Do you guess he meant me, Dad asked Mother. Why, I ought to break his neck. Of course not. He was speaking in generalities, I'm sure. The hellish whistle could be heard gradually disappearing in the distance. And that is the end of Chapter 17, and we will continue tomorrow night with Chapter 18. Have a good night, everyone.